We are looking at a standoff on a total knife's edge. Seriously, the world feels like it's on the brink of a new war in the Middle East, and the clock is absolutely ticking. So let's break down how we got to this point and what could possibly happen next. And really, it all comes down to this. Back on February 20th, the US president laid out this incredibly stark ultimatum. He basically gave Iran just 10 to 15 days to meet American demands. It's a deadline that has put the entire world on high alert. Because, if diplomacy fails, the alternative is conflict. And that deadline, well, it pushes us right to our first section. We are on the brink of war. The kind of language we're hearing, the military movements we're seeing, it all suggests a major conflict isn't just a possibility, it might be just around the corner. This is the huge question and hanging over absolutely everything. And to even begin to answer it, we have to look at what's actually happening on the ground, in the air, and at sea. So let's take a look at the military chessboard. The evidence of this escalation it's undeniable. There are massive military forces now being positioned all around Iran. 2. That's how many U.S. carrier strike groups, we're talking the USS Abraham Lincoln and the USS Gerald R. Ford, are now sitting right off Iran's coast. And listen, we're not just talking about a couple of ships here. Each one of these is a floating fortress, a whole self-contained naval fleet with its own air force, basically designed to project overwhelming power. And it's not just happening at sea. More than 120 U.S. aircraft have surged into the region. This includes some of the most advanced jets in the world, the F-35s and F-22s. These are stealth fighters designed specifically to get past sophisticated air defenses, just like Iran's. To put that into perspective for you, this is the biggest American air power buildup in the Middle East since the 2003 Iraq War. But Iran isn't just sitting there and waiting. They're responding with what's called an asymmetric defense. You can kind of think of it like David versus Goliath. Instead of trying to match the U.S. head-on, their strategy is to make any potential attack as painful and as costly as possible. They're doing this with things like naval mines, swarms of attack drones, and heavily fortified hidden missile sites. And those joint naval exercises with Russia, well, that's a pretty clear signal to the world that they don't see themselves as being completely alone in this. If you zoom out, the wider region is, well, it's a complicated picture. Israel is on maximum alert, but, and this is crucial, key Gulf states like Saudi Arabia and the UAE are saying, nope, our territory will not be a launch pad for an attack. Meanwhile, other big players like Turkey, Russia, and China are all pushing hard for de-escalation. So while all these military pieces are moving into place, there's this whole other race happening at the same time, a frantic last-ditch effort at diplomacy. Mediators from Oman and Switzerland have pretty much been working around the clock. Secret talks kicked off in early February, then there was another round in Geneva, and now a critical third meeting is scheduled for February 26th, which is right up against that presidential deadline. Talk about pressure. But here's why it's so incredibly difficult. The U.S. is demanding zero uranium enrichment and wants Iran to stop its ballistic missile program. Iran, on the other hand, has offered to dilute the uranium it already has, but only in exchange for sanctions relief. And as for their missile program, they've completely rejected any limits on what they see as their right to self-defense. So you can see, the gap between the two sides is just massive. And the public messages coming from Iran really reflect this defiance. The Supreme Leader Khamenei delivered this very direct threat. It's a clear piece of psychological warfare aimed squarely at those two U.S. carrier groups sitting in the Arabian Sea. But then, at the same time, you have Iran's president, Masoud Pezeshkian, sounding a much more conciliatory note. He's thanking mediators and warning that a conflict would just swallow the entire region. This kind of double messaging really highlights the internal pressures and the complex game they're playing in Tehran. So why should someone sitting halfway across the world care about any of this? Well, because the global fallout is already happening. The economic ripples are being felt far, far beyond the Middle East. Okay, first up, energy markets. The fear of war disrupting the Strait of Hormuz, which is a choke point for about 20% of the entire world's oil, has sent prices surging. Brent crude shot up over 4%. That adds what they call a risk premium to every single barrel of oil, and it threatens global economic stability. As all this uncertainty grows, investors are doing what they always do. They're fleeing to the classic safe haven, gold. And prices have soared to nearly $5,000 an ounce. That's a huge, clear sign that global markets are bracing for some major instability. But the most severe economic pain is being felt inside Iran itself. The national currency, the rial, has totally collapsed. On the black market, it's now at 1.62 million to a single US dollar. That's just wiped out the savings of ordinary people overnight. This has created an absolute perfect storm for the Iranian people. I mean, citizens are literally trapped between a collapsing economy, a brutal crackdown from their own government, and now the looming threat of a foreign attack. And we just cannot forget the incredible human cost of the recent domestic crisis there. After widespread protests, human rights groups are worried that the death toll from the government's crackdown could be over 20,000 people. This is a population that is already under extreme duress. So where does all of this leave us? Well, it leaves us with a world that is basically just holding its breath. We're all watching this incredibly precarious balance between these powerful forces pushing for war and these last urgent efforts that are pulling for peace. The core dilemma couldn't be clearer. In Washington and in Tehran, the people in charge are facing this monumental choice. You've got warships on the move, you've got negotiators running out of time. Which path will they ultimately choose? Honestly, the stakes could not be any higher. Are we watching diplomacy's final, desperate hour? Or are we about to hear the first shot of a devastating new war? The whole world is about to find out.